Hi everyone, welcome to channel Qtomation. In today's session, we will see about very important topic that is about API chaining using ITestContext in TestNG. But before that, let's understand what is API chaining. API chaining is a technique in API testing where multiple API calls are executed in sequence and the response from one API, usually like ID or token or any other parameter, is used as an input in next API call. For example, let's say you have create user. So once you call the create user API, it will give you some response. In response, it might return some ID or token, etc. And that response, which includes ID, that specific ID is used as request parameter in some other response like update user, delete user, get user by ID, etc. So response from one request is used as a request parameter in another API. That is called as a API chaining. So that concept is called as API chaining. API chaining is useful for end-to-end or workflow scenarios where actions are dependent on previous steps, such as creating a user post request, then fetching the ID, and by using that ID, updating the user data, or let's say deleting that user, all linked by that specific dynamic data from earlier responses. So that is the concept of API chaining. So to make it understand in better way, just consider this example. Let's say you have one create user API. That create user API creates a user in a system and that gives you ID of that user which is created. And that ID is required in request parameter of different APIs. It might be required in request body or it might go as a path parameter as well. For example, if you want to get user by its ID, we need ID of that user which is received from the response of create user API. Also, if you want to update the user's data, then also you will require that ID of the user because you should know which user ID needs to be updated. Let's say you want to delete the user. So we also require ID of the user which needs to be deleted. So for delete user API also that ID is required. That is called as a API chaining. So the response which is received from create user API contains the ID and that ID is required in another APIs. So this concept is called as API chaining, which is normally used in end-to-end workflows of different applications. Now in rest assured, we have already seen if we create all the test methods in one class. For example, if you create test create user, test get user by ID, test update user, test delete users, all these method if you create in one class only, then in such situation, we can declare that ID as a class variable. So the response which you receive in create user, you can fetch the ID and you can declare it as a class variable and it can be used across other methods as well. So in this scenario, we can use that ID in multiple cases also. That is perfectly fine. But let's say instead of creating these methods in one single class, if you have created different classes, so you have created create user as a separate class, get user by ID in separate class, update user in another class, and delete user is also in another class. So all the classes are different here. In such situation where all the methods are present in independent classes, previous approach will not work. So we will not be able to pass the ID in another class methods. So we cannot declare ID as common class variable in such scenarios. So to handle such scenarios, we need some new approach. In rest assured, we can use ITestContext of TestNG. So TestNG provides one feature of ITestContext which can be used for API chaining. When using TestNG for API testing in rest assured, ITestContext can provide a mechanism to facilitate this data flow between different test methods or even different classes within the same test suite. So we will see one practical example, then we will understand in better way how we can do the API chaining by using ITestContext. But before that, we need some APIs to test it out. So we have one website, gorest.co.in. If you go to this website, if you first time visit this website, we should first create one token. We should first one get our access token. So let me just show you. So if you first time visiting this website, so this website provides some sample test APIs which we can use it on our test script. So it provides the API like create user, update user, delete user, get user by ID, etc. But for those API, it needs one access token. So that you will get after login. So if you see, these are the different APIs which are provided. For example, create user, create user, update user, get user by ID, and delete user. If you see in this documentation, they have also provided curl request. So we can simply use this curl to create request in Postman. So what we have to do, we have to simply copy this curl. I'm just copying it. Let's go to Postman, click on import and just paste your copied curl here. And once you paste it, you can simply import that specific request. Now this is a request to create the user. This is a request to create the user. So if you see, this is a request body. Request type is post request. This is URL of that request. And this is a request payload. So we are creating a new user by this API. Name, gender, email, and status. If you click on send, but we should have some token here. So I have already imported all these requests in my collection. So I have created one new collection in which I have already created this request. So what you can do is you have to import all these curls. This is for create user, update user, delete user, and get user also. So once you import this curl, I have already imported. So this is a create user API. In this create user API, it is a post request. This is endpoint and this is request body. And in authorization, we should pass one bearer token. And from where we can get this token? So we need this token. So that is passed as a authorization bearer token. In headers, we are passing it as a bearer token. So this bearer token, we can get it after login. So once you click on login, you can log in with GitHub, Google or Microsoft. And once you log in, you will get your access token. And that access token is required to call this API. So once you receive this access token, if you see, you can simply click on this get your access token. It will ask you for authentication. I have already authenticated myself and after that I have received that token. So on after you log in with Google with your account, you will see that login token upfront. You can simply copy that login token and use it in your API. So I will just show you the flow of this API. So first one is create user API. This is post request. Inside the body we have to provide some name. So I'm just giving name as Jamie. We have to provide some unique email address. This is email address. Gender, we can provide it as a male or female, and status can be active or inactive. This is a request body, so it will create this user. So once I hit this, it will give you response. What is the response? 201 created, that is the status code, and this is the user which is created. And if you see, it also gives you ID. This is ID of this new user which is created. And now the concept of API chaining. So this ID we have to use in get user by ID API. Now what this get user by ID will do? So we have to pass this ID as a path parameter here. This is get request. So it will fetch the record of that specific user of this ID. So that's why we require this ID from create user API. Once you create the user, you receive the ID, and that ID we have to pass it in this URL in the API of get user by ID. Then you will see the record of that specific user. Similarly, if you want to update the user data, let's say I want to update this user information. So again, we will need this ID for update user API. So this is the endpoint of update user. Again, we have to pass that ID of that user. This is put request because it's an update call. And here we can update the information. So let's say I'm just changing the name. So I just want to update the name as John. I also want to update the email. Let's say test123. Gender as female and status as inactive. So this will update that user ID with new information now. So once you hit this request, you will see it has to be inactive. So it's a small spelling mistake. So inactive. Now if you hit the request, it has updated the data. So again here we have to pass that ID. So if you again check the information of this user, in response we received the updated data. And similarly, if you want to delete that user, so let's say I want to delete this user. So again, this is a delete request. This is the URL, and in which we have to pass this ID of the user which has to be deleted. And if you send this, it will delete that request, delete that user. So now if you try to get user ID, get user API by that ID, it will show you resource not found because we have already deleted that. So this is a simple flow of create user, get user by ID, update user, and delete user. So the response which we receive from create user, that ID we have to use in other three APIs. Now by using rest assured, how we can perform that we will see now practically. But before that, we have to create four classes which contains four different methods: create user, get user by ID, update user, and delete user. So one by one, let's create those classes. So first one is create user. So let's go to Eclipse. In Eclipse, I will create a new package. So in this project, I will just create a new package. I'm naming it as user test. So this is a new package which I have created and named it as user test. In this, we have to create a new class. So I will just create first class, that is create user class. I'm naming it as create user. And in this class, we will create one method, test create user. That is a method name. So we have created test create user method. We will also need rest assured packages, static packages. So I will just copy those packages from one of our previous sessions and let's paste it here. We have to provide at the rate test annotation. Let's import TestNG annotations as well. Now in this create user test method which we have created, we are going to create request payload first. So what we want to automate is this API. This is a post request type, this is endpoint, and this is a request payload. So if you want to create the request payload, there are multiple ways. We can use hash map, we can also use external JSON file, org.json, or we can also use Pojo technique as well. So in this session, I will simply use hash map. So let's try to use hash map. So first I will just create one hash map object. Let's import hash map package. From java.util, we have imported the hash map. Now in this data object, so this is a data object of hash map. In this we have to put the data. We have already seen this in our previous sessions. In one of the earlier sessions, we have already seen how to create a request payload by using hash map. So in this data object, we have to put all those information which we want to pass via request payload. So what is the information which we want to pass? Name, email, gender, and status. So one by one, let's put all those value. Name, and here we want to understand one thing, that if you see this API, that is create user API, if you try to hit again, it will show you, if I try to hit it again, it will show you email has already been taken. So email has to be very unique. So we will use faker library here. So what we can use is, we can create one faker class object. We have already seen use of faker class to generate random test data. So let's import faker, and by using this faker class object, we can simply generate some random name as well. So faker dot name dot first name. So it will generate random first name whenever we execute this test. So every time it will generate some random test name. After that, we have to put data dot. So for rest of the request payload also we have to use it. Next one is email ID. After name, we have to provide the email ID. Email. So for email, again we have to generate this randomly from faker class object. Faker dot in internet it is available dot email address. It will generate random email address every time we execute this test case. Name, email, gender, we can put it as male. Name, email, gender, and status, we can keep it as active only. That's it. So in this data class object, we are putting this data which we have to send in request payload. So we have created data class object, hashmap class object of data, and in that we have to put all those information which we want to pass via request payload. Now one more thing we have to understand. So if you see, in all these four APIs, create user, get user, update user, delete user, we have to pass authorization as a bearer token. So for that, what we will do, I will just define one token also, string token equal to, I will put that value of my bearer token. So this is a bearer token which we want to send in every API. Now we can use our regular syntax, that is given, when, and then section. So first is given. Inside given section, we have to mention headers first. So let's put headers. Inside this headers, we have to pass authorization. So if you see in Postman also, inside headers, authorization, bearer keyword, and the token. So we have to pass like that. So headers, authorization keyword, along with authorization keyword, we have to pass bearer, then space, that needs to be concatenated with our token. So basically it will pass this authorization key which has the value of bearer keyword space. If you see, bearer keyword space and then this token. So that's why we are mentioning like this. So it will pass that authorization bearer token in the headers. And also content type is application slash JSON. If you see, content type application slash JSON. So this information you have to pass in the header sections. So this is for given section. Also we have to pass request payload also. So where we have stored that request payload, dot body. So request body, we have stored it in data object. So that object we have to pass here. Dot body request payload, that is for given section. Now we have to use when section. Dot when. Inside the when section, what is the request type? It's a post request. It's a post request and we have to give this URL. In post request, we have to put this URL. So it will hit this endpoint with post request and the headers which we have provided. Now we can use then section, but what I want to do is I will first store this response in response type of variable and then we can fetch the ID. So I will just end it here. Let's create one response type of variable, response res equal to. So in this response type of variable, we are storing the response as a response object. We are storing entire response object inside this res. Now the next step, now from this res we can fetch the information. So once you hit the create user, let me just hit it again. So once you hit this create user API, it will give you this response. And what information we require? We are mainly interested to see the concept of API chaining. So we require this ID. This ID we have to pass in further request of update, delete, and get user by ID. So we should fetch this ID first. So from the response, we have to find this ID. So what we will do, we will simply define one, let's say string ID equal to res dot from response dot json path dot from response we are just fetching the information dot json path dot get. Inside get we have to pass id. So response dot json path dot get what information we need, that is id. So that id will be fetched and that should be in string format. So I'm just using toString method. So it will fetch the id from the response body and it will store it in this id variable. If you want to print it, we can simply print it also. So system.out.println, let's say user id is, so this is basically user id. User id is id. Let's save this file. So we are fetching the id from the response and we are storing it in id variable which we have just defined. Now I will just save this and let's try to execute this just to verify whether we are able to get this user id from this API response or not. So let's run this file as TestNG test. So it is executing this file. Test case is pass. And if you see user ID is this one. That means our test case is perfectly working correctly. It is able to fetch the user ID and store it in that specific variable. So this is for create user. Now we can create another APIs as well. So we have to create the class for get user by ID. So we have created for create user. Now let's create another class in our package. New class get user. Let's finish it. And inside this class again we have to create a new method. So what we will do, we will simply copy this one. At the rate test, let's name it as test get user. String token we will require because every API require this bearer token. In this we don't actually need this faker class object. Also this is a get request. So we don't require this body. So we just require a token. We will store the response. So response res equal to given section. Inside the headers it will remain same. Content type will also remain same. Dot body dot data we will not require because it's a get request. Dot when, this is get request. So which API we are now using, the get one. So this is basically this one. So this is a get request type. This is the URL. Inside this URL if you see we have to pass this ID here. So what we have to do, dot get, this is the endpoint, but in this endpoint we have to pass the user ID. So in this endpoint we have to pass the user ID as path parameter. So if you see the URL here, if you see this is the URL. After users we have to pass the user ID. So what we have to do is inside this endpoint we have to put slash. As of now we will just use curly brackets and we will define user ID. This is a variable which needs to be passed here. And as of now we will define one user ID here. So let's define one string user ID equals to, let's say 123. So as of now I am just defining 123. But in reality it has to come from create user. So once you hit the create user.java, automatically it will fetch the response. From the response it should fetch the ID which is received in response, and that ID has to be passed in this specific endpoint as a path parameter. So as it's a path parameter, if you see in given section we have to pass that path parameter as well. So dot path parameter, and that path parameter is user ID. So in this is a key name user id, and this is the user id which we have to pass, and this has to come from the create user. But as of now, let's keep it as 123. We will not execute this test case, we will just keep as it is currently, unless we create another classes as well. So this is a structure. There is user id which will be coming from create user.java, and that value has to go into this endpoint as a path parameter. So that's why we have added inside the given section. So that's why we have added that inside the given section. And this is an endpoint, and this two line we don't require now. Let's save this. So this should hit the get request now. This should successfully hit the get request, and it will fetch the response. So in this response, it will be store this entire response. So let me just hit this. So this is the ID, and automatically when we hit this URL, it will fetch the record of that specific user. And what we can verify here in this get request, we can verify ID which we are getting is correctly this one or not. So what we can simply verify, let's say res, or we can simply first just verify the status code assert dot assert equals response dot status code. What is the expected status code? 200. 200, that is the expected status code. And also along with that, what we can verify, we can also check if the response body which is received, that contains this specific ID or not. So let me just copy this one. Let's go to our code. Assert dot assert equals, we can simply store it. So let's say I'm just creating one string. Let's say expected, or let's say string received ID equal to res dot body, response body. From this body dot json path dot get which information we want to fetch, ID. So let's say dot get ID dot to string. So it will convert that into string, and that ID will be stored in this received ID, and that received ID we should compare with expected ID. So we can simply assert that value. So received ID should be matching with this user ID which will receive from the create user response, because we are getting the information for that specific user ID. So when you call this get user by ID, we are passing this ID here. So in this also, this is matching with this one. So both values should match, then only test case will pass. That is for get user. This part just keep it on hold as of now, because this value needs to come from create user.java response. That we will see in some time. But before, let's create another class for update user as well. So let's create a new class for update user. So let's create a new class for update user. It would be similar to create user only. So let's copy the create user one. So this is test update user. I'm making some changes now. Token will remain as it is. If you see the update user request, it is put request type. In this we have to use request payload for the information which we want to update, and in URL also we have to pass that user ID for which we want to update the information. So what things will change here? Request body will remain as it is. We will generate some random name again that will be updated to that specific user ID. So this information will remain as it is. So let's say instead of male I will just update as female, and instead of active I will make it as inactive, and we will fetching the response. What is the request type here? It should be put request type. And again, what is missing here? This is URL will remain as it is, or it will change? It will change because we have to pass this user ID here. So again, we have to put after this users, we have to pass the user ID here, and this user ID will come from response of create user.java. So again, let's define one user ID, string user ID equal to, as of now I am just keeping it as 123. And one more thing we have to change is inside this given section we have to add path parameter. Dot path parameter. Path parameter should be user ID that we have to pass in given section. So this is our update user test case. In this we should have this user ID which is coming from response of create user API. And if you want to validate, we can also validate in similar to get request, because once you hit this update user.java, in response you will receive this. So again, similar to the data which we have updated, that should come into the response. So we can verify whether ID is correct or not, or name is this one or not. But we will simply verify for status code and ID only. So let's put assert dot, or we can copy it from get user. We can use the similar validation here as well. You can put validation with your logic as well. Our main intention of this session is to understand how the API chaining works. So I'm just putting this simple validation which will verify ID which is matching with updated user ID or not. That should match. Now the next step. So we have created create user, we have created update user, we have created get user. Last one is delete user. So let's create another class for delete user. Let's create a delete user class. Inside this, it would be similar to get user. So I will just copy this, paste delete user. Again, we will require user ID, token, given, content type, path parameter also we will require or not. So do we require path parameter? Yes, we will require the path parameter, because if you see this delete user API, this is endpoint. In this endpoint, we have to pass this user ID. So inside this is basically delete type of request. In main section, we have to mention delete, and endpoint will remain as it is. If you see, it will remain as it is. Here we have to pass the user ID. So this user ID will come from create user API. That user ID will be passed here, so that it will delete that specific user with that ID. And after deleting, we will receive 204 as status code. So we can simply verify status code has to be 204. Let's save this. So these are the classes which we have created for all the four test methods, and all are independent. Currently they are present in separate classes: create user, get user, update user, and delete user. So all the four classes with four test methods are created. What is the thing pending now? So once you call this create user, you will receive the response, and that response will contain the id. That id we have to pass in get user by id api. So this is the user id. Now we have to chain it. So we have to use TestNG feature, that is ITestContext. So in TestNG, we have one feature that is called as a ITestContext interface. How ITestContext is used? ITestContext acts as shared context object that can store and retrieve the data throughout the TestNG test run. It implements IAttributes interface, providing methods like setAttribute and getAttribute. So I will show you practically. So what we have to do is, in createUser.java, in this method, if you see test create user method, in this we have to pass one parameter, that is I test context, and one variable, that is context object. So I test context, we have to import it. So I test context of import, we have to import it from ITestContext org.testng. It's a TestNG feature. So by using, so what is ITestContext? It acts as shared context object that can store and retrieve the data throughout the TestNG test run. It implements IAttributes interface, providing methods like setAttribute and getAttribute. So basically, it is one of the way to create one global variable which can be passed to different classes present in that specific test suite. Just understand like that way. So by using this context, we can set attribute. So what we have to do is, we can set the attribute. So we can simply create one variable, and in which we can set the attribute. So I'm just creating one string, let's say user id equal to context dot set attribute, context dot set attribute. In this we have to pass, what we have to pass, so context dot set attribute, which variable we are storing. So from the create user response we receive the id. So from create user response we receive the id. So what we have to do is, so let me just copy this line. So at the end, when we receive the response, we can simply set the attribute of id. So we receive id in the response. So I'm just putting id here, and that we can store it in user id. So this user id refers to this id. So it will set the attribute. So context dot set attribute user id id. So this id will contain, id is basically the id which we receive in the response of test create user. So that will be stored in this user id. Alright, so we have to use context dot set attribute user id id. So we don't have to define here. So this is the wrong. So we just have to use context dot set attribute user id. So this is the user id, and we are defining it as id. So id which we have received from the response of create user, we are assigning it to user id, and we are setting this attribute, that user id will be this id, and this attribute which we are setting inside this context interface. And now this can be shared across all these methods. So how we can use this in different methods now? So now next one is update user or get user. So inside this get user method, if you see here, we have to simply again use, here also in this method we have to use ITestContext. Let's import this ITestContext from org.testng, and here again now we don't have to use this 123. So here simply we can use context dot. So in create test user we have set the attribute. In this method we have to get that attribute. So get attribute, what is the attribute name we have set? That is user id. We can set single or we can set multiple attributes as well. So let's convert it to string. So we can set single or multiple attributes as well. So we can simply set the attribute in this create user.java. Here we have set the attribute by using context, that this id refers to this user id. And in this get user.java, we are simply getting that attribute of user id. So it will fetch that id which is received from response of create user, and it will assign that value to this user id. And then this user id will be passed as a path parameter here, and it will be passed to this assertion as well. So this will pass this value. Similarly, in the update user.java also same approach. So again here we have to use ITest context. Let's import ITest context, and again also here we have to get the attribute. So if you see string user id equal to context dot get attribute, and what is the attribute name here? User id. So we can fetch that specific attribute. Let's convert it to string, and it will be used in update user.java as well. Similarly in delete user.java, here also we have to use ITest context, and by using this context, here we can simply get that attribute. Context dot get attribute, name of that attribute, so user id. So that user id will be fetched and it will be stored in this user id. So this user id will be passed as a path parameter here in, and also in this endpoint url. So it will perform the delete user. So this is how we can pass the context from create user.java. So here we have set the attribute, and that specific user id we are passing it in another three methods as well. Now how to verify whether it is correctly working or not? How to verify that? So what we can do is we can simply execute all these test cases at once. But for this we have to use testng.xml file. So in TestNG, we can execute multiple test classes together by using testng.xml file. So we have to first create that testng.xml file. We can create manually or we can simply create automatically as well. So just click on this package, right click on this, testng, convert to testng, click on next, select the classes, click on finish. So it will create one testng.xml file here. If you open this testng.xml file, you will see all the class names which we want to execute. So first one is, so here we can define the sequence. So first one I want to define create user, because the flow will start with create user only. Once you create the user, you will receive id in the response. By that id you can call get user, then update user, and then delete user. So all these four classes are present inside this test. So if you see the hierarchy, inside the test, all the classes are present. Inside the test, all the classes are present. And this is basically considered as one test. This one test contains all the four classes and its four methods. And this entire test is present inside this suite. So this is called as the suite. So we are executing this on suit level. So this is the suit name. In this suit there is one single test, and inside this test there are four classes that will be executed. So now let's execute this testng.xml file. Let's see the output. So let's run as testng suit. So once you execute this suit, ideally all the four test cases should pass. If you see, all the four test cases got passed. That means our test is working perfectly fine. So we are able to pass the response from the create user to update user, get user, and delete user as well. So this is how we can use ITestContext approach to pass the context from one test class to another test classes. Now one more thing which we have to notice here. And if you again execute, again it will perform the action. Run as TestNG test, or let's say TestNG suit. It will execute all the test cases, and all the four test cases will be passed. If you see, all the test cases got passed. Now if you see this testng.xml, inside these classes these four classes are present, and this is executed as one test. If I want to execute those as separate test, for example, let's say I am just creating separate four test, 1 2 3 4. In first test it will be only create user, in second test case only get user, in third one only update user. So I want to execute all those test cases independently, or let's say in separate test inside the suit. So basically inside the suit four tests are different now. Inside this suit there is, this is the test, first test, let's say test 1. So we have to provide different name, test 1. This is test 2 for get user, this is test 3, and this is test 4. So all four tests are now different, present inside the same suit but different test. Now these are present inside the same suit but different test. So what I will do is, now let's try to execute this now. Or instead of that, let's say I'm just creating one copy of this testng.xml. Let's create one copy. Let's paste it here. So this is testng2.xml, and in this I will just undo all those changes, so it will go to our previous state. So let's save it. So first testng.xml, which contains one suit. Inside this suit there is one test, and this test contain all the classes. This we have already executed, and it got executed perfectly fine. Now we have created testng2.xml inside the same suit but different test now. So inside the same suit all the four tests are different. So four classes are present in different tests now. So if I try to execute this now, it will fail. Let's see. So it will pass only the first test. Now if you execute this, let's see the output. So we are executing testng2.xml. If you see, only first test case got passed, only create user got passed, and after that it was not able to pass that id in other three requests, because that ITestContext which we have used so far is able to pass the context across all the test classes which are present inside the single test, which are present inside the single test only. Then only it was able to pass that context. But now we have created different class in different test. So now we have created different class which are present in different test in individually. So in this case, how we can perform that? So we have to make some small change. After that we will be able to pass across all the separate classes as well. So what we have to do is, inside our script where we have set the context, So let's go to create user.java. So previously we have used set attribute, but now we want to set that attribute for entire suit. So now we want to set that attribute across entire suit. So instead of context.set attribute, we just have to use like this: context dot suit. So we have to use context.getSuit.set attribute. So it will set that specific context across all the suit, across entire suit now. So even if all the tests are present in, or the classes are present in different tests, it should be able to pass now. So we have to set the attribute, but before that we have to use dot get suit. And in another methods again, let's say get user dot java, where we are getting this attribute. So if you see where we are getting this attribute, we have to use context dot get get suit dot set attribute. Get suit dot set attribute. Let's save this. Not set attribute, this should be get attribute. Let's save this now. So context dot get suit dot get attribute. Same line we have to use this in update user. In update user, where we are fetching this one here. So we have to use like this. Here we have to use like this. Let's save it. And inside delete user also, we have to use like this: context dot get suit dot get attribute. So it will be able to pass that context across all the test and all the class which are present in different test also. So now if you execute this TestNG2.xml, it should able to execute all the 4 test cases correctly. So let's execute this as TestNG suit. So it should execute all the test cases correctly this time. And for all the 4 test cases should pass. If you see, all the test cases got passed. So that's why now if you see, this is executing perfectly fine, because now that context is available across entire suit. All the tests, even though if they are separate, it is still able to pass because that context is now applicable across entire suit. In previous approach, when we didn't use get suit, in that case it was applicable only inside this test. Only for this specific test it was applicable. But now with that approach, let's say if you execute testng.xml, will it execute all the test cases correctly or not? Let's see that. Let's execute this testng.suit by using this testng.xml. It will be still able to pass all the test cases because it is now applicable across all the test suite, entire test suite. So if you see the testng.xml, test is present inside the suite, right? So previously here also, even though if these are all separate tests, they are all present inside the suite. So test is present inside the suite. Here also test is present inside the suite only. So if that context is applicable across entire suite, this will also run perfectly fine, right? So this is the concept of using ITestContext for API chaining. So I hope, let's revise one more time. So what was API chaining context? So what is API chaining? So whenever sometimes we have to pass response of one API into request parameter of another APIs. In such case, we have to pass that response to request of another APIs. So if you create all the test method in single class, we can still declare as a class variable and we can use across all the test cases. But problem comes when they are present in different classes. So all these test cases are different classes. So in that case, we cannot use the previous approach. So we have to use one of the TestNG feature, that is ITestContext. So what is ITestContext? It acts as shared context object that can store and retrieve the data throughout the TestNG test run. It implements IAttribute interface, providing methods like setAttribute to store the data and getAttribute to retrieve the data. That we have seen the practically as well. So in createUser.java, what we have done, we have used ITestContext, and by using this context, we have set the attribute on the suit level. If you see here, we have set it on the suit level. Previously, we have set it on the test level. So here, if you see, we have used context.getSuit.set attribute user ID. So here we have set that attribute. We have stored that data, and then we can use that attribute in all other methods. So in getUser.java, we have to just get that attribute value, and it will pass that value from create user to get user. And similarly in delete user and update user as well. So that is the concept of ITestContext in rest assured. So I hope you have liked this video. Kindly subscribe to my channel, like this video, comment on it, provide your feedback, because that motivates me. So thanks for watching this video. Let's meet in our next session for more interesting topic of